you're anticipating this refund, and then instead of a direct deposit, you go to the mailbox, you get this letter, and you find out that all of your refund or a portion of it was actually offset, which means it was taken by the IRS to satisfy some other debt. So, what does that look like? You all file marriage filing jointly, as I said, and let's say that your spouse owes back taxes that you didn't know about before you were even married. And you may be thinking, well, that's not my responsibility. But remember, when you file marriage filing jointly, you all are both jointly liable for things. So any refund that's yours is now theirs. And any refund that is theirs, the IRS is looking at like, we're going to take that and apply it to the debt.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family. This is episode 15. And today we're going to stay on the same trajectory as last time, okay? So in episode 14, we talked about marriage and not quite marital bliss. Today, we're going to talk about something very similar, but not quite the same. So, like I said, last time we talked about innocent spouse relief. That's when you notice that there's been some fraudulent activity on your tax return and the IRS has assessed more penalties. You were not aware of the fraud, should not have been aware of the fraud under normal circumstances. So, you file for that innocent spouse relief. So, you're not responsible for those extra penalties and things that have been assessed. Today, in episode 15, we're going to talk about injured spouse relief. Now, with injured spouse relief, usually people in the marriage are still getting along, right? No fraud has taken place. So, we're going to take a look at what injured spouse relief is, or better yet, we're going to look at, are you an injured spouse? We're going to look at the difference between injured spouse and innocent spouse, just to make sure that if you find yourself in this situation, you know which form of relief to go after. And then we're going to talk about the form to file for injured spouse relief and when you should file it. So, first things first, are you an injured spouse? So, I hear people get innocent and injured spouse confused. So we want to be very clear. If you're an injured spouse, you have to have filed a married filing jointly tax return with your spouse. And what happens where the injury comes into play is you're anticipating this refund, and then instead of a direct deposit, you go to the mailbox, you get this letter, and you find out that all of your refund or a portion of it was actually offset, which means it was taken by the IRS to satisfy some other debt. So, what does that look like? You all file marriage filing jointly, as I said, and let's say that your spouse owes back taxes that you didn't know about before you were even married. And you may be thinking, well, that's not my responsibility. But remember, when you file marriage filing jointly, you all are both jointly liable for things. So any refund that's yours is now theirs. And any refund that is theirs, the IRS is looking at like, we're going to take that and apply it to the debt. But if you're in this situation, I hate to break it to you, it actually can get a little bit worse. Not only can the refund be offset by back IRS taxes, they can also legally take back state income taxes. They can take state unemployment compensation debt. So One of the things that I saw happen a lot during the pandemic is some people didn't receive their unemployment benefits at all, and then other people received excessive amounts or they received it fraudulently. They didn't actually qualify and they received it. If that's the case for your spouse and the IRS is working with the state now to come back and collect that, they could take your tax refund and actually apply it to that debt. The other things that this could happen with is if your spouse owes back child support, they will take the refund quick and in a hurry. Or it can be a federal non-tax debt, such as student loans. Now, we haven't really seen that in the past 2 years. And I'll say, when I say we, I mean my office, because for the federal student loans, those nobody's really had to make payments for the past 2 years, unless you're like me. I had a service provider where they were like, "Yeah, we know what President Biden said, but yeah, you still got to make payments." Oh, President Trump said you don't have to pay. No, on this loan, you still have to make payments. So maybe you have seen it and you fit in the category with me. Bottom line is, any of those debts can mess with your tax refund. And again, you may be thinking, but that's not any of my responsibility. Or you may be thinking, you know, I didn't know what I was signing up for, or maybe you did, and we'll just deal with it. Well, you don't have to deal with it in this way where they take your tax refund. You are actually an injured spouse, and you can seek injured spouse relief if any portion of your refund has been taken for past due federal tax, state income tax, state unemployment compensation debt, child support, or a federal non-tax debt such as student loans. Okay? So, again, let me just do a recap on what the innocent spouse relief was. The innocent spouse relief is where generally both the spouses aren't responsible for paying the full amount of tax, interest, and penalties due on the joint return because there was fraud on there that you were unaware of. And when the IRS caught it and they assessed additional tax and additional penalties and interest, you won't be held responsible for that if you apply for innocent spouse relief and if the IRS grants it. So you may qualify for relief from the joint tax liability for innocent spouse relief if there's an understatement of tax because your spouse omitted income or claimed false deductions or credits and you didn't know or have a reason to know the understatement. Remember in last episode, I gave the example of the creative deductions or adding children to your tax return that don't actually belong there. You may also qualify if there is an understatement of tax and you are divorced, separated, or no longer living with that spouse. The last one, given all the facts and circumstances, it wouldn't be fair to hold you liable for the tax. All right. So those are the things that you look at to see if you qualify for innocent spouse relief. If you do, I urge you, go back and listen to episode 14. And then if you need help through that, you can actually go to the website and I have a training out now to see if we would be a good fit to work with you in getting that resolved. All right. But the majority of people that I've seen are going to qualify for injured spouse relief. And we're in the fourth quarter, preparing for tax season. If you know your spouse has some of that debt, whether it's back child support, federal taxes, state income tax, go into the season prepared. Okay. There is a form that can be filed with your tax return so that your portion of the tax refund is not affected. This tax form is Form 8379. It is injured spouse relief. Okay. Or no, I'm sorry, I added the relief. It's the injured spouse form. Okay. So with Form 8379, like I said, you can go in and file this with your tax return to make sure that your portion of the refund is not affected. Now, the IRS will give you um, a chance to file it after the fact because maybe you filed jointly and you had no idea that this was even the situation that your spouse is in. So if you are in that dilemma, right? You know, you're upset, irritated with your spouse because they didn't tell you, but you love them at the same time. No worries. You can still file Form 8379 to get your portion of the refund. Okay? So let's look at this. You will need to file Form 8379 each year you meet this condition. Okay? So if your spouse has back child support, you can't file Form 8379 and you know, one time and that's it. No, you have to file it each year that your refund may be taken by the back child support. So until that back child support is gone, you need to make sure you're filing Form 8379. So you must file this form within 3 years from the due date of the original return, right? So, like I just mentioned, if you filed a tax return, you didn't know this was going to be the situation, your refund is taken, you have 3 years from the original due date, which is going to be usually April 15th. This past year or this past season, it was April 17th. Last year, it was in May. We've had all kinds of crazy stuff. So you'll want to make sure for that tax year, you see what the original due date was. All right, but let's look at how to file. As I said before, it is going to be best if you file this with the tax return. And the reason I say that is because you're going in and you can control the situation, right? So generally, if you file Form 8379 with a joint return on paper, and this is going to be okay, typically I see people do this after the fact. It's going to take about 14 weeks for it to be processed. Um, that I believe is the IRS being very nice because have you seen in the Wall Street Journal, the cafeterias are still jam-packed with returns that need to be processed, all right? I would not paper file this. If it's filed electronically, eh, you get a little bit more speed. It takes about 11 weeks to be processed. All right. So if you file the Form 8379 by itself after the joint return has been processed, the time needed is 8 weeks. So let's be clear on one thing though. You may be thinking, well, shoot, I want to just go ahead and file my return, then file the form because it'll only take 8 weeks. That knocks about 6 off. But remember, how long does it take for a tax return to typically be processed? All right. In a pre-COVID world, it would be about 21 days max. In a post-COVID world, we have to go back and check and make sure that you didn't get advanced child tax credit payments. We have to reconcile if you got the stimulus check. It's taking quite a bit longer. So again, you want to be in control of the situation, but I just want to give you both sides. It's something that you're going to have to decide with your spouse and your tax professional how you're going to go about doing it. Okay. So on the 8379, what happens is there's an allocation of taxable income, and then there's an allocation of how much tax has been withheld. If you have a W-2 job, if you make estimated tax payments, there's the application of that too. If you're self-employed or you have investments, that type of thing. And then we take the refund and it's allocated. Now, if you're not familiar with the term allocated, that just means we take your spouse's portion that is attributed to them and your portion is attributed to you. So, for example, if your spouse makes $60,000 a year and you make 40, we're looking at 60% going to your spouse, 40 to you. Now, on the form, we'll have your actual amounts of income. It's not that type of percentage like that, right? But here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize. If your W-4 withholding is not right, the allocation of the refund that you get may not match everything that you had withheld. What do I mean by that? So maybe you and your spouse combined income, you're in the 22% tax bracket, right? If you only withhold, so about, I don't know, 8% of your income, well, the majority of the refund actually would have been allocated to your spouse, not you. So you want to make sure when you're in this situation, before you start moaning and complaining, that you actually have your tax withholding correct. Now, I'm not going to go into it deep here, but on YouTube, my channel is Timalyn Bowens, America's Favorite DA. You can find the withholding video, how to properly fill out your W-4. And I do go through the example for married filing jointly to make sure your withholding is correct so you don't end up owing at tax time versus the IRS just taking your refund for back taxes. Okay. But back to this allocation. We're going to look at how much was paid in, how much was made, and then look at the refund and see how much each one should have actually gotten if they weren't joint. Once you do this and the amount is determined and you file the form, it's processed, accepted, there are going to be things that you have to turn in with it. So you'll have to turn in certain proof of income. Um, but this is all going to be on the instructions. So you're not blind. Okay. You're not blind going in. And then your tax professional will also help you. If you want to understand this form better, I also have on my YouTube page a video to walk you through Form 8379. Because check this out. When you go to file your taxes, you don't want to be surprised by your refund being taken because you don't know if your spouse has this debt hanging over their head or not. There is an offset number. All right. You'll want to check out the instructions for the latest Form 8379, and it will give you a telephone number where you can call to see if you have any debt that would offset a tax refund. If you don't, awesome. If you do, you want to make sure whatever amount that is, if it's back taxes, is correct. The way you'll do that is by going to check out your tax transcript. You didn't think I was going to fit it in on this episode, but I did. I'll always fit it in. The tax transcript is going to be where you want to go to confirm any tax debt. In the show notes, I'll link to um, a blog post I wrote showing you how to get your tax transcripts in 3 steps. Okay. You want to confirm that debt. Then you want to make sure that when you go to file your taxes, you have Form 8379 along with you. All right. So if you know that your refund is going to be offset, you probably qualify as an injured spouse, not innocent spouse. And then you want to make sure that you file the 8379. And as I said, you want to be ahead of the game and control of the situation. File it with your tax return, not after. Now, you know I'm a huge advocate of back taxes not ruining your life, right? So you may have listened to all this and been like, you know what, someone that's awesome. My refund's not going to be affected, but I still have to live with this person. We're building a home and life together. What do we do about their back taxes so we don't have to worry about this anymore? Well, you know what? I'm glad you asked. First of all, you're in the right place checking out this podcast. Second, if you owe $100,000 or more, I actually have a new training for you, and it's free. I'm going to link it in the show notes, and it's going to walk you through the steps of what needs to be done to actually help you get that 100K that you can't pay today negotiated. All right. So make sure that you check out that free training. If you qualify, if you know somebody that you're like, man, I know they owe that much, this would really be good for them, please share it. Please do me that favor. All right. Because, I'm on my personal mission to fill the tax literacy gap, one taxpayer at a time. So make sure that you check out the training. Also, we are streaming on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you're following us there or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. And let's stay connected on social media. I'll see you on episode 16.
I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.